Ever since Ron Gvili's body came home, that's the final hostage, the soldier whose body was still in Gaza. Ever since he came home a couple days ago, everyone has now really ramped up the talk about moving on to phase 2 and the reconstruction of Gaza. And the other day, Mike Waltz, the United States ambassador to the United Nations, was talking about all of this in the UN. And I want to listen carefully to what he's saying. And I'm actually going to stop this video at a few points and talk about it as we go, because he touches on a number of very important topics. Let's have a listen.
Petraeus for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Al-Akbarah, for your briefing. It was good to spend time with you late last year. Welcome to our colleagues, Your Excellencies of Foreign Ministers from Greece and Liberia. I think first and foremost, we should truly take heart that Ron Gvili's remains have finally returned to his family, who have suffered through unthinkable hardship for far too long. His funeral was today, and we hope his return brings a measure of solace and closure for the family that I also had the honor to spend some time with. And I think we all hope the remains of all the deceased are returned to their loved ones, those that were killed in this horrible war started by Hamas, so that these families can have some type of closure and peace. Colleagues, for the first time since 2014, in over a decade, Hamas and its terrorist affiliates no longer hold any hostages in Gaza. That's extraordinary, and we should take note of it. And I hope all those who claimed Hamas didn't know the locations of every hostage understand, frankly, their error. It is only due to the relentless efforts of the Israeli people and government, the tireless work of President Trump, his special envoys, Witkoff and Kushner, and the strong pressure put on Hamas, brought to bear by not only the United States, but our partners in the region, that all the hostages have at last returned home, and we could take those yellow ribbons off our lapels. Colleagues.
Okay, I want to talk about this. You know, he makes it sound like that the last hostage came home under the same circumstances as all the earlier ones. Let me explain what I mean by that. It's true that we have a lot to thank President Trump and his team for bringing the hostages home. But when he says there that it's only due to the relentless efforts of the United States and Israel and the partners, he left out one very important thank you there, one very important factor that led to the finding of Ron Gvili's body and the release of his body, and that is the IDF. Let me explain. You see, there is this perception out there that finally, Hamas released Ron Gvili's body, or the terrorists returned his body. Nothing can be further from the truth. All of these weeks and months that have gone by that they've denied knowing where he is or haven't returned him, they were refusing to return him. Let me tell you the true story of how Ron Gvili's body was returned. It had nothing to do with Hamas helping out, nothing to do with it at all. In fact, they were withholding it. What happened was the IDF started suspecting, there were some soldiers in the IDF who suspected that that in a certain Muslim cemetery in the Gaza Strip that was right next to the home of a very high-ranking member of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is another terrorist group kind of adjacent to Hamas. They kind of work together with Hamas, but they're a different group. So this high-ranking commander in Islamic Jihad had his home next to this cemetery, and some soldiers said, you know, we should really check this out. They went into the home. They discovered some tunnels. They destroyed the tunnels. But then they were also suspecting that there was something fishy about this cemetery, and they asked permission from their commanders to look into the cemetery. At the same time, they went in. There was a special operation that went in to one of the most dangerous areas of the Gaza Strip a few weeks ago, and they kidnapped a high-ranking terrorist in Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they brought him over to the Israeli side. They pulled him out. They actually went in to an Islamic Jihad neighborhood in Gaza, the special forces in Israel. They pulled this guy out, took him to the Israeli side, and interrogated him for 2 weeks until he revealed that, yes, Ron Gvili's body was somewhere in this cemetery. And these soldiers went in there, but he wouldn't tell them exactly where. Maybe he didn't know. The Israeli soldiers went in there, and they actually dug up bodies from the cemetery. And they dug up 250 bodies. And the 250th body that they dug up was that of Ron Gvili. That's how his body was brought home. It was not brought home because Hamas decided, okay, the time has finally come to move to phase 2. It did not come home because of diplomatic pressure from the United States. Of course, other hostages did. So we're going to give credit where it's due. But understand, this whole saga of the hostages only ended not because Hamas was willing to end it. It's not because they complied finally with the terms of the agreement. They did not. They were refusing. And they knew all along he was there. The reason he came home is because the IDF took on a dangerous operation, went in there, and found him themselves. That's why this whole thing ended. Let's go on. There's a lot more that Mike Waltz had to say in the UN. So let's continue with his testimony there.
On January 16th, President Trump celebrated the formation of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. For the first time since 2007, the people of Gaza who desperately want peace, and they want peace and not Hamas, its supporters or its enablers, they have an opportunity to chart a peaceful future for the Gaza Strip.
Okay, that is, I wish that were true. It's patently false, according to all polling, including polling done just a couple months ago in October. Palestinian polling, Hamas still remains very popular. Listen to this poll question. There was a poll question in this poll done in October of 2025, just a few months ago, where they asked the residents of Gaza, and they also asked the Palestinian Arabs, whatever you want to call them, in Judea and Samaria, known as the West Bank. They asked them the following question: are you in favor of Hamas laying down its weapons to end the war, if it will mean the end of the war? That was the question they asked them. Very simple question, right? Are you in favor of Hamas laying down its weapons if it will mean the end of the war? Well, okay. And here was the answer. 87% in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank, and 55%, still a big majority, in the Gaza Strip, were opposed. And then there were those who were undecided. Only 29% of the total of Palestinians supported it. So 69% overall, 69%, close to 70% of all Palestinians said that they would rather the war continue and Hamas hold on to its weapons than Hamas lay down its weapons to end the war. In other words, they do not want a future without Hamas. They want Hamas to remain in power. They want them to remain armed, and they don't even want the war to end if it means that there's no more Hamas. So it's kind of wishful thinking. I appreciate the positive sentiment by Mike Waltz and by the Americans who keep telling us and telling themselves that the people of Gaza just want a better life and they don't want Hamas in power. Unfortunately, according to polling and according to their behavior, for the majority of them, that does not seem to be true. Well, but we can only hope. Let's go on.
We are grateful, deeply grateful, for Dr. Ali Sheikh's leadership of the National Committee and for our partnership with those serving alongside him to restore public services, to rebuild civil institutions, and to stabilize daily life in Gaza. Last week in Davos, President Trump announced the Board of Peace, and with it, the transition to phase 2 of the 20-point plan, both of which were established and endorsed by this committee. in Resolution 2803. The results of Phase 1 speak for themselves. A ceasefire that the entire world were begging for and demanding. Humanitarian aid that was so desperately needed. And the release and return of all hostages to their families. Phase 2 will advance the full demilitarization and reconstruction of Gaza in line with the President's plan and with Security Council Resolution 2803. On behalf of the United States, I would like to thank all those that have committed to joining the Board of Peace, especially fellow council members Bahrain and Pakistan. Under President Trump's chairmanship, the Board of Peace is acting and not just talking. With the President's vision and tenacity, the board will help realize a new Gaza and a break from this decades-old cycle of violence. We realize it's unconventional. Change makes some uncomfortable. But with this innovative approach, we are leaving behind decades of wasted time, wasted money, and wasted chances for peace. And we are already seeing results. With the cooperation and assistance of Israel and our Board of Peace partners, over 55,000 trucks have entered Gaza, bringing food, shelter, and medicine since the ceasefire began.
Okay, I'm just going to say this quick. It's about 600 truckloads a day, and it almost all, goes right into the hands of Hamas. Hamas takes all of this food, and there's also fuel in there. It's not just food and medicines. It's not just sandwiches and baby formula. There's also a lot of fuel in there that's used for all kinds of nefarious activities. But the main thing is that Hamas takes all of this and they end up being the ones distributing the food. They sell it. They use it to recruit more people to their ranks. So the vast quantities of humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip have only strengthened Hamas. Now, that doesn't mean that Hamas is still an existential threat and that they're not building up weapons. So let's not say that the sky is falling. But I wouldn't be so quick to celebrate the vast quantities of humanitarian aid that have gone right into the hands of Hamas and made them very cash solvent. They're using it to fund all of their activities and pay all of their operatives. So it's a bit of a problem there.
1.3 million people have received food assistance in December. We welcomed the reopening of Allenby Gate and King Hussein Bridge, the crossing between Israel and Jordan, and we welcome the full reopening of the Rafah border crossing, which will expedite the flow of medical evacuations. But we must take care. Assistance cannot devolve into dependence, and with support from the High Representative for Gaza, Nikolai Mladinov, the National Committee will restore essential services throughout Gaza and foster an economy where opportunity replaces unemployment and dependence. But before we can reach this goal, Hamas and other militant groups must lay down their arms.
That, my friends, is the big issue. That is the big problem. Hamas must lay down their weapons. And yet again, Hamas is saying, here we have Musa Abu Marzouk. Musa Abu Marzouk, Hamas senior official Musa Abu Marzouk said yesterday on January 28th on Al Jazeera that Hamas has never agreed to lay down its weapons. That's Musa Abu Marzouk, senior spokesperson for Hamas, yesterday, January 28th on Al Jazeera, saying we've still never agreed to lay down our weapons. And the big problem with the Trump 20-point plan, if you read the plan, one of the big problems with it, maybe the biggest problem, there's a few. I think I'm going to make a separate video about the various issues in the 20-point plan to look for in this phase 2 that are going to cause problems, because there's a few of them, and maybe we'll read through the plan. But in the Trump 20-point plan, it talks about the disarming of Hamas simply as something that will happen. Hamas will be disarmed. Hamas will lay down their weapons. And he said it here again. Hamas has to lay down their weapons. Hamas will lay down their weapons. The Gaza Strip will be demilitarized. What's the problem? The problem is that nowhere in the 20-point plan does it say whose job it is to take the weapons away from Hamas. It makes it sound like it's just something that will take place or that Hamas will agree to. And Hamas continues to insist. They said this the day the 20-point plan was announced. They've been saying it ever since. And like I said, Musa Abu Marzouk, senior Hamas official on Al Jazeera yesterday, saying again that Hamas has never agreed to lay down their weapons. So look, if these Board of Peace people want to start trying to do something and trying to make it work, all the power to them. But Israel must not withdraw even 1 inch from its positions on the yellow line controlling 50% of the Gaza Strip. And must not allow some sort of dog and pony show where they pretend to disarm and give their weapons to each other and claim that they're not Hamas anymore. Israel's going to have to hold firm, and that's one of the things to watch for in the coming days. We're going to come back to this topic a lot. But look, Mike Waltz is a good guy. He's been a great supporter of Israel, and he's obviously reading the statement he has to read. And but again, I can't stress this enough. There's a lot of wishful thinking in the American proposal here. So all the power to them. We're happy Ron Gvili is home, but let's keep a realistic perspective on what's going on over there in the Gaza Strip. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, all that stuff, share it, tell people about the channel. We're still just getting started. And please make sure to check out all the great content that we're putting up at Israel 365's YouTube channel. God bless.